there's these four types of, commonly translated as grasping, attachment, or assumptions, as you like to say, upadanas, four types of upadana. The one I'm interested in, upadana, so assumption to views, commonly translated as grasping to views.
Yeah, probably grasping is kind of, it implies that you're aware of what you're grasping towards. But you going towards things, it's already on the basis of false assumption or assumption in regard to those things. That's why you're already reaching out, because you assume that you can reach out. So when it comes to views, assumption to views, upadana means basically that you're already not even aware that you're acting out of your views, which means you need to undo your lack of awareness to become aware that you've been assuming the standpoint of a view. It's not like, oh, I must stop holding fixed views, as if it is a matter of choice. Because as the Buddha said in that sutta, well, that view is fixed then. When that man said, oh, my view is that no view is pleasing to me, which is what usually people chant in the temples and say, don't hold to fixed views. And then the Buddha said, well, no view is pleasing to me, well, that's surely pleasing to you. And then he says, oh, it is, isn't it? So, I don't hold to fixed views is your fixed position. You can't just decide to let go of the views. And that's what I mean. Upadana is not like grasping, because grasping, I'm not going to grasp for this. And people think, okay, so that's how I'm undoing my upadana. No. You undo your upadana where you see it. See, you can only take something at face value until you know the real value. You can only take something at the for granted, a nature of something for granted, until you have understood that nature. Then, even if it were the same as to what you assumed, you won't be assuming it because you know it. So, assumption and knowledge are mutually exclusive. Absence of knowledge means presence of assumption. Presence of knowledge means absence of assumption. Dark and light. Hence all the similes that we would give. And that's literally what assumption means, even in Greek. Assumere, take for granted. Take at the face value without knowing what that thing is. And then you realize, oh, so your whole actual existence, I am, and this is mine, these things are for me, that's already on the basis of that assumption, that these things are like that. And if you wonder whether you assume things, well, ask yourself. The Buddha said the one who is free from assumption is free from suffering. Am I free from suffering? No, means the assumptions are there. But you can't find them as the objects of your attention, because your attention is already rooted in that assumed basis. And that's where the views are. That's why the view is the most blameworthy thing, as the Buddha said. Wrong view. Because wrong view, everything is, well, going to be tainted by that wrongness of that view. Even if you're doing right things.
So an example of...
Well, an example of wrong view, well, many. View of sensuality, view of sense of self. Attavada, obviously.
Yeah. Well, there's those four. It says assumption to sensuality, assumption to views, assumption to
virtue and duty,
and assumption to self. Attavada.
Attavada, right.
Self.
Yeah, they all share the same nature.
Yeah.
It's just to different extents.
Sure.
But it's the same principle of you acting out of a standpoint that's based on ignorance. That's based on your active ignoring of it. So that's why it takes that effort to stop ignoring it and undo basically your own lack of knowledge in regard to it. And that's how the assumption falls off. That's how you stop fueling the assumption. You can't just make a choice to not assume, because your choice is already a result of your assumption, of your view of what your existence is, of your view of what you are, what your sense of self is, what the ownership is. That's what I mean, encourage people to question yourself, because that's how you start questioning what you took for granted. I remember in my own case, I was doing walking meditation and sort of contemplating consciousness and five aggregates, and then it dawned on me, I'm using all these terms and designations. Like I say, oh, consciousness, and it's like this and so that, but without what it is, what is it? That consciousness in itself, the word that I'm using, I'm clearly designating something. What am I referring to? So I realized that even terminology I was using for myself, I didn't have clarity in regard to it. So how can then that unclear terminology result in clarity of wisdom of that which precedes the terminology that you're trying to designate with those very terms? So then instead of trying to figure out what consciousness is and what's most pleasing sort of setup for what I think consciousness is, I thought, well, wait a minute, why don't you just say consciousness and see at least approximately what am I referring to right here, right now, in my experience while I'm doing this walk meditation when I say consciousness. And then I realized you people, and including myself at the time, using all like matter, form, consciousness, feeling, intentions, and then you build your practice on top of it. But wait a minute, what does those terms at the very basic level, at the face value, what do they mean? And you realize, I have no idea. I have a vague notion of the meaning, and I ignore that it's vague, and then I carry on building up a pleasing structure that will result in magical product of enlightenment. But anyways, that's why Nyanavira kept talking about undoing the wrong views. Not like overdoing or doing on top of them until you climb onto the right view. No, right view is by abandoning the wrong views. Undoing the doing of wrong views, it's another way of saying abandon the wrong views. Not abandon by outrunning them, but abandon by withdrawing yourself from the wrongness of them. So that's what I mean. You take all this, like I was taking feeling, like feeling, whatever it is, I was taking for granted that whatever ambiguous, vague knowledge of feeling I had, I took it for granted that that's what feeling is. And I said, no, that's where the problem is. Not because I don't find out what a feeling is, but because any movement in regard to feeling that I can do, it's done on the basis of me having taken it for granted, already implied that that's what a feeling is. But that's not what a feeling is. How do I know that? Well, because I'm not free from suffering. As the Buddha said, if you were to truly understand the nature of feeling or any aggregate, you will be free from any taking for granted, any assumption, any craving, any suffering. So that's what I mean. It's about undoing. And that's a view. I gratuitously was unaware that I was holding a view that I knew what the aggregates are when I was thinking about them. And on top of that view, then I was trying to practice the Dhamma of understanding what the aggregates were. But once I realized that it's the opposite direction from where you were going with it, so no, you practice the Dhamma but by undoing what you think these views are. That's why everybody starts with a state of putujana. And the way to stop being a putujana is to undo the aspects of your experience that are maintaining you as a putujana. Not to kind of, as I said, climb on top and reach some pinnacle whereby you suddenly become a sotapanna. You become a sotapanna by undoing the doing of putujana.
But it's almost, as you're saying, we assume that we begin in this place of purity, and then we go about our lives and then... Oh.
Yeah, exactly. So you come across the Buddhist teaching, it makes sense to a degree, and you don't question that, but then you just try to build on top of it. But instead of building on top of it, you start questioning back to yourself. Wait a minute. Okay, I have no doubt. I'm not doubting, I'm not denying that this sutta makes sense. But instead of now taking for granted that that's what the Buddha also meant by that sutta, let me then change, or rather revise and see how much it makes sense. Because by the end of this sutta, people who understood it became arahants, or at least sotapannas. Am I an arahant or at least a sotapanna? No. Which means the degree of that sutta making sense to me is not sufficient. So instead of building on top of that degree in a direction of evolving the sense, let me undo what I think the sutta is more and more until I get to know what the sutta is. And you undo it by the way I said it. So the sutta talks about the four great elements. I have a thought and concept of four great elements. If that were truly what four great elements are, I would be free from suffering, or at least I would be a sotapanna. So when I think about the four great elements, that's not what the four great elements are. Or rather, I'm thinking about the four great elements affected with ignorance, assumption, craving, and everything else. Which is why I think I can think about the four great elements, but at the same time, not be an arahant. Or I can think about the five aggregates objectively, without upadana, but I'm not an arahant. That's a contradiction in terms. If you can think about them objectively, you'll be free from suffering. And you know you're not free from suffering, thus you mustn't keep taking for granted what you think objective thinking is. Because you have a measure of suffering that should be reducing the more and when I say objective, I mean more aligned with the nature of how the aggregates actually are. Impermanent, unsatisfactory, cannot be a basis of ownership. So that's when the suttas, when monks would want to understand something, you basically say it out loud, like feeling. What is feeling? So not like, let me think about and develop a concept of feeling, but feeling. So you designate it twice, presently. Like right here, right now, feeling, I'm feeling. What is this feeling that I'm designating with my verbal utterance, with my thoughts? What am I referring to, basically, right here, right now? Oh, I'm referring to this. So, yes, but all these concepts that I'm providing now as an answer, they are secondary to the very direction that I designated by saying feeling. What am I feeling now? Because it already implies that something's being felt. So now I'm asking, what is being felt while it is being felt? So it forces you to go against the grain, up the stream. That's why it's so unpleasant, so ambiguous, so opaque, so dense, so obtuse. Because the attention, everything goes down with the grain. And that's why the yoniso manasikara is the counterpart of ayoniso. With the grain, yoniso is basically back to the womb of that grain. And all of those types of assumptions are basically views. Fundamentally, you think you have a view that you are your own, that you are your own master, self-controller. That's why you think things belong to you. And that's, you see, view cannot add anything to the aggregates, nor can take anything away from the actual aggregates. It can only confuse the order and put first that which is second. So, in this sense, your sense of self, I am, is just so gratuitously assumed that is seen as an independent entity that owns things, that chooses yes and says no. But once you realize that that's a wrong order, that it's not that you own things because you are, it's you are because you keep maintaining the ownership of things. That's why Buddha said the possessions determine you. Like that king would not have been known as a king. He wouldn't have been a king without having the possessions of a king. He's not a king. He defines you. So your body, your state, all of these are possessions. And that's why you are. That's why you have sense of self. So you don't deny the sense of self, but you uproot it by seeing that it's not the owner, it's the result of ownership. And you will uproot it when you see that gratuitously assumed ownership of these things cannot be owned because they have arisen on their own. And it's only because they persist on their own you can maintain your gratuitous taking at the face value as, oh, this presented itself for me, thus I must be, thus I am, thus this is mine. So you're not analyzing things or breaking them into parts to deny their reality. No, you accept the reality. Because that's the only way you can remove the ownership of it. You trying to break things into parts and saying, see, they're not really real. Because atoms and electrons are constantly changing. That's you now obscuring your ownership through denying the existence of things. A is A. Feeling is feeling. Perception is perception. Things are things. Phenomena are phenomena. The Buddha never said, oh, in the scene there is no scene. No. He said, in the scene there is just the scene. In the arisen there is just the arisen. There was never a problem. Why would you then go and analyze that which has arisen? What is it made of? Failing to see that it doesn't matter the amount of parts you discern. The functional arrangement of that phenomena that it gives the context to the parts is still very real. Which is what enables you to look at different parts without losing the sight of the thing that is being comprised by those parts.
You can see that the dependence
of course,
of
yeah.
those things. The parts.
Parts are within the context of the thing, which is what the thing is.
So
you denying the existence of the thing by saying it's made out of parts. It's basically failing to see that each part then is an individual thing as well. So then you're just denying the existence of A because there is B. See, feelings are not real because they are perceptions. It's a magical assumption that these things somehow relate, or that they cancel each other out. So feeling is not real because it's just hormones and chemicals and sensations running through your body. So would you know hormones and sensations as relatable to feeling if that feeling is still not persisting right there? So it's very real. It's just on a different level of that generality where you're looking. So by focusing on the part, you are the only one that loses the sight of the general context, general image, the phenomena. But it doesn't mean that the phenomena disappears because you don't see it anymore. It's still there, which is why you can keep looking at the parts. And not like ask yourself, wait a minute, what is this now? You know exactly what part you're looking at, which means the context is still at the peripheral of your mind. But you've been negating to look in the peripheral and only focusing on what's in front of you actually, focusing on that, making a point of just staring at that. That for you, you assume that this peripheral that is there doesn't exist anymore. That's what I meant in the other talk. I said, for most people, even their own thoughts feel like they're not real. They're not concrete enough because they got used to only the concrete, palpable aspects of their experience to be the reality. But if the thoughts were not real, how can you think them? How can you talk about them? How can you remember things you thought? It's real. Whatever. That's what Buddha didn't say. Whatever, only material things are real or only mental things. He said whatever has the nature of manifestation, that's why it's real. And that's exactly where Sotapadhi begins, understanding that. That's where impermanence is. Oh, whatever has the nature of manifestation, whatever can manifest, whatever can appear, it cannot be mine. That's what it means. Whatever has the usual translation, whatever has the nature of arising, has the nature of ceasing. Whatever is of nature to manifest, that's why it's impermanent. Because it has a nature of manifestation on its own. Not a nature of manifestation being created by me or coming from me. And that's how you will force yourself to uproot the gratuitous ownership of various manifestations. Not through denying them, not through trying to destroy them, but by seeing that you can't own them even if you want to. Once you start uprooting the ownership, no sense of self can remain then maintained, fueled by that ownership. And then any view that you had that it's me, therefore things are mine, will fade and it will become inconceivable. So it doesn't matter whether you wish to be free from sense of self and the view of self. If you stop maintaining the sense of ownership through right reflection, you will be free from the sense of self. That's what the Buddha meant when he said, it's like even if a hen sits on her eggs.
Doesn't.
No, if it sits on the eggs, but even if she doesn't wish, may my chicks pierce the shell and come out safely, they will, because she sits on them. Or if a hen, even if she wishes that her chicks pierce out safely, but she doesn't sit on her eggs, they won't. So even if you wish, may I be free from sense of self and become an arahant, if you're not doing it rightly on the level of removing the ownership, you won't be free from those things. Even if you don't wish to be free from sense of self and wish to become an arahant, you will if you start removing the ownership on account of understanding the independence of manifestation.
Removing the assumptions.
Well, it will then remove the assumption.
Yeah.
Assumption is maintained through ignoring the basis of assumption. So the assumption of sense of self, sense of I am, is maintained through ignoring the fact that you are not the owner of things. So then your acts, so that's how then assumption becomes kind of its own fuel. It fuels you ignoring, but it's the very presence of ignoring that fuels back the assumption. So it's a vicious circle through and through. That's why you can't break away from it accidentally or spontaneously or in a split of a second. You can only break away by understanding it and then forcing yourself to go the other way. No, everything is for me, but I'm told I should not regard it as mine. and you have faith in what you were told, and you keep doing it. Because it corresponds that things are actually not yours, that's how you get to see, because you stop fueling the assumption. And after a while, when that views of those assumptions have faded, then you get to recognize what has faded. Like what the Buddha said, like a carpenter using the axe. He doesn't think, oh, today I'm wearing my handle thin this much, tomorrow I will do it this much. No, he just keeps doing it and doing it and doing it until one day he looks at the handle and says, oh, I must replace it because it's completely gone. That's how assumptions fall off. Not like, I'm grasping, I refuse to grasp, thus I'm free from this upadana. You can only wish that it's that easy.